Welcome to As the Story Grows. I'm Brian Patton. Today we welcome Earthtone9 frontman Karl Middleton to the podcast. Earthtone9 will release In Resonance Nexus this Friday, June 21st on Candlelight Records. Karl dives deep into his musical influences, talks about the band's breakneck pace at the start of their career, their sound before and after the hiatus, why it took so long to release this album, and more. I'd not listened to Earthtone9 before getting the press release for the new album, but it blew me away and their back catalog is spectacular. So if you enjoyed the audio clips in this episode, make sure you listen to the new record on Friday and dive into the band's discography. Thanks so much for checking out this episode of As the Story Grows. If you're new to the show, welcome. You can find links in the show notes or at asthestorygrows.com to our Discord server, to sign up for the mailing list and support the show financially and get early access to every episode via Patreon. Enjoy today's chat with Karl Middleton from Earthtone9.
Summer's almost here. The rain is falling. The usual English things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about England is it's like super mild, which is something that lots of folks don't appreciate. There's something really strange about there's an Atlantic current, I think, that really holds it between probably, depends on what degrees you use, but basically generally between 40 degrees and 75 degrees, or 0 degrees and 22. You know what I mean? So there's none of those crazy winters and mad summers that you get in many places. Whereabouts are you based?
Washington, D.C.
Okay, I don't know too much about the climate there. I mean, I guess it's not a million miles from New York, so you probably get like minus 20 winters and 95 degree summers.
Yeah, not quite that cold in the winter, but yeah, I mean, summer we're about to hit. It's gonna suck. It's gonna be terrible. Right. And you know, getting hotter every year as it goes. Yeah.
I mean, the main thing that we're sort of experiencing in the short term is kind of just more common, what would have been very unusual weather. So you know, we've just had the second wettest September to May on record. And so I live in an area where it's a large proportion of farmers, and you know, many of them just haven't got their seedlings into the ground. So food production is like a month behind.
Yeah.
So it feels, you know, it's a much more significant and potentially difficult to navigate change. I think we imagine in the developed world that because of globalization, you can offshore the majority of the negative effects of climate change, and you know, to some degree you can, but you know, there is a reality that food will be more scarce.
Yeah,
seasonal food will become more seasonal again instead of it just
always being around. Yeah. Did you grow up in the Nottingham area?
Do you know I didn't? I grew up quite close to London, but I relocated there because that's where the band was based in like the late 90s. Mm-hmm. Earthtone9 was formed out of a band that preceded it called Blast Cage, and they had a production deal with a studio, so they had moved up there.
Okay.
I don't know, in 1995 or 1996. And I joined the band as a stand-in to do a tour in 1996, and then we sort of changed our name and recorded our first demo at the end of '96, and then, you know, we were kind of like a local band sort of thing, and that progressed over time. We recorded 3 demos and we put those together, and they became our first album, and that came out in 1998. And then there was just, you know, like a snowball from that point onwards.
Nice. Well, what was growing up like?
Pretty standard, you know. My parents are music enthusiasts, my dad particularly. So there was a lot of rock and roll in our house,
Nice.
mostly like Led Zeppelin, Santana, that sort of 70s coolish rock,
Yeah.
but quite mainstream. But he also liked a bit of Afrobeat stuff. So bands like Oceanic, which is kind of like a Ghanaian version of kind of like what Santana was doing.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was rad.
That's
yeah, but just a fairly standard upbringing, I suppose.
yeah. Was that kind of your gateway into music, just being exposed to it at home and enjoying rock music?
Yeah, kind of. But then when I was at middle school, when I was about 10, a new kid came to our school and he had a denim jacket with patches on it. And so I was like, what is AC/DC? What is Iron Maiden kind of thing? And then I got exposed to those bands. And, I felt like I just really dug rock and metal. So, but from the age of 14, I was like a committed metal guy. So when I was 14 in 1988, so the sort of all of the first wave of thrash bands were having really significant albums.
Yeah.
And the sort of second wave was sort of coming through also. And then there was really killer stuff happening with bands like Faith No More, Jane's Addiction. Those I guess they were alternative metal, but I don't think that was a thing then. It was almost like college radio music, but it was more metallic. And it was quite a fertile period, I guess. You can be deep into music for about 6 months and then your listening tastes change or something formative happens and you switch. So yeah, at that period, there were key bands and what kind of like I was just heavily influenced by them. So I really liked Rollins Band. I really liked Living Colour. I really loved King's X. Those bands that were kind of occupying rock and metal, but perhaps weren't cookie cutter. That's really always influenced my taste in that I like bands where they're thinking about hooks, but I also like bands that challenge the listener to pay attention or to trust the artist that they're doing things that in time will bear fruit rather than it being highly instantaneous all of the time.
No, the late 80s, early 90s really spawned this wealth of bands that didn't fit this mold because, coming out of hair metal and you had your thrash bands, but it's like alternative rock and metal kind of blended and you had all these bands doing unique things that like really went away once, I don't know, all the scenes kind of pocketed and everybody was cookie cutter in a way that they weren't in that time frame.
Yeah, it felt like an interesting time. And when it's so odd now because it's almost 30 years ago. So it feels like, when I was a kid, like young, only the earliest rock and roll was 30 years old, pretty much. Frank Sinatra was 30 years old. Elvis was 30 years old. Heavy metal was, like the earliest form of heavy metal, like Black Sabbath, was 18 years old. So the idea of being in 2024 and lots of the most significant bands operating are 2, 3, and 4 decades into their career was just something inconceivable because it was a new form of creativity, of a new genre. Yeah. So yeah, it's wild. Yeah. It's cool to have been on the train with something as it's grown up and turned into a sort of mature form of music. Yeah.
Was there a good music scene or metal scene where you were, whether it was bands coming in and touring or just like a lot of local stuff happening?
Yeah. I was about a 30-minute train ride to get into London, so I could see lots. I saw lots of bands at the Hammersmith Odeon, as it was, which is like an iconic London venue. It's where Motorhead recorded No Sleep Till Hammersmith. But when I was a teenager, it was like a real pinnacle that bands could get big enough that they could play at the Hammersmith Odeon. So I saw Testament there, I saw Death Angel there, saw Slayer there a bunch of times, saw Anthrax there a bunch of times, And then, more recently, I've seen Nick Cave there. I've seen Tori Amos there. I've seen PJ Harvey there. I've seen, but lots and lots of bands play there. It's like a 5,000 cap venue.
Nice.
And then when I lived in Nottingham for those few years, there's a very strong grassroots scene there. Lots of great bands have come through there. So there's a well-known in the UK club called Rock City, and it's like a 2,000 cap space, and then it's got a smaller room which holds about 400 people. So it's like the stock that bands play in the middle. And then there were about 10 or 15 really cool pub venues, club venues that local bands played, and that was just like in the city, kind of like almost in the downtown. And then there were other satellite towns where people played. So there was a lot of good music going on, and England's so freaking small,
Yeah.
It's things are clustered really, really tight. I could get to Bristol and Birmingham, and Bristol, Birmingham, Manchester, like very large cities, are probably within 3 or 4 hours of each other. Something that's laughable to US folk in terms of travel.
Yeah. Did you ever try your hand at an instrument, or were you always like focused on being a vocalist and didn't have interest in playing?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I played bass, but I was an enthusiast, but I was kind of behind the curve in terms of picking up an instrument. So many of my friends started playing guitar, bass, or drums or whatever in their early teens. And then I was like, a couple of years later, I was like, oh, this is something that I'd really love to do. But by that point, they'd attained a certain level of competence. So I felt like I was very much behind, and it for whatever reason, it just felt like too insurmountable for me to catch up.
Gotcha.
But what I did notice was that I think it happened. I don't know if it's a time thing or a clustering of people thing, but like no one could sing. Everyone was a really shitty singer.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, well, every band needs a singer, so I'll try that.
Yeah.
And, started with mimicry and then developed my own sort of style over time. So yeah, from the age of 16 or 17 or 18, I was participating in band practices or musical gatherings by singing, because I was the only person that could carry a tune. And then that developed as I wanted to be in bands that were serious, write original music, and do all of the cool stuff that's associated with music, where it's an avenue of expression, a means of communication, and is also lifestyle and popular culture orientated, all the good stuff that goes into the bucket of music or niche music.
Yeah. You said you got to know the Earthtone9 guys initially by filling in for a tour under a different name, but how'd you get connected and meet them? So
the original bass player in Earthtone was one of my very close friends at the time, and he had joined a band that was like from a few towns over, that were like the best and most serious band in the area, and they were playing. They weren't just playing locally, they were ambitious and they seemed more serious, so they were more dedicated, or they had more resources and ability to make things happen. Mm-hmm. And that band then morphed into Blast Cage, which then morphed into Earthtone9. So I'd known them as an entity for 2 or 3 years before I sort of did that fill-in tour, which was about 6 months before I actually joined. It became a different band, and I became like a proper member. Yeah. So yeah, I've known them for a while.
Nice. Where'd the name come from?
It was, it's the first word on In the Meantime by Helmet. Earthtone suits you, so give it a smile. And we had, what it's like, you pore over what a potential name could be, and every name sounds lame But it's almost like when the meaning of the name becomes redundant and it becomes associated with the music, the meaning shifts. So like Alice on Chains is a kind of sucky name, but they're such a godlike band that you don't really ever interrogate what that is.
Right.
Or Anthrax is kind of like, why would you call yourself after a disease bomb? What's that? But you don't ever think about it.
Yeah.
And so it was in that period of time where I just thought that Clutch was the coolest name, or Caius was the coolest name, and we were trying to think of something that felt elemental and had something to do with music. And then I read somewhere that in earth tones can mean like the shades of death or shades of earth, soil, decomposition, and that sounded really cool. And Helmet are a really big influence on us. That being heavy but not being metal, as in wearing leather trousers, but the sort of upending of conventions. Yeah, was something that we were really interested in. So a band that was phenomenally heavy but looked like college nerds, but playing the most powerful, repetitive, punishing music was just like a really cool thing. It's like, wow, how did they arrive there?
Yeah, outside of Helmet, were there other things influencing you? Because those first, I guess the pre-hiatus records, like, have a very distinct sound that's very raw and kind of hardcore realm a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that influenced us, or was a rationale for how we did things, was that the core of the band came from a death metal background, so very technical, very precise, that sort of clarity, or a manner of production clarity. So Morrisound, Machine Head, that sort of thing. And we wanted to do something that felt a little bit more like Steve Albini, where it was warts and all. And so the music was, we often recorded mostly live, particularly the heavy distorted guitar. And so the band sped up and slowed down. There are some mistakes there. There's that natural, there was separation and isolation in the rehearsal studio, typical, but there was some bleed, so there's like some ambient noise going on in there. And so it was like a somewhat of a 90s noise rock aesthetic, but coming through the lens of modern metal influenced by death metal and thrash. And we were, because of the era that we were, the bands that had recently sort of changed the musical landscape were bands like Pantera and Fear Factory, in terms of mixing aggressive and hook vocal melodies, and to some degree Korn and the Deftones were like cool underground bands. They hadn't really blown up at that point. I guess in the UK there was a bit of a lag, even though their records came out in 94 and 95. They probably weren't huge until Life is Peachy and Adrenaline, not Adrenaline, Around the Perth dropped. Yeah. So we were interested in those bands because they were doing something new, and it felt game-changing and unique within the metal sphere. Yeah. So it was kind of like that clustering of influences.
Nice. How'd the band get connected with Copper Records?
So the sort of band before had done a tour with a UK death metal band called Gomorrah, and the core of Copper Records is Jose Griffin, John, I've forgotten his surname, and Mike, I've also forgotten his last name, but those three guys were in Gomorrah, and then they decided to set up a label, and they had this sort of homespun thing where Jose was working as a booking agent because he had self-booked these Gomorrah shows. Mike was like an engineer, so more of a technical dude, and he built a studio in his back garden. And then John, it was at the time when music was a physical format, and so they also ran a sort of mail order store business. And so those three facets were already happening, and then they were like, we should put out bands as well. And so they had heard the demo, and they were like, oh, we'd love to put your record out, and we already had a relationship with them. And one of the things that we've liked to do wherever we can is work with people that we know and trust, that we can grow with. Mm-hmm. And so the low definition Discord, we thought it was going to be a kind of on the down low kind of thing, but it got a couple of really great reviews. The first one was in Kerrang magazine in the UK, and that kind of spiraled, and the record, it was still small and underground, but it sold like 10 times more than we'd kind of expected. And then loads of cool stuff kept happening, like, oh, do you want to do a tour? We need you to do a month-long tour with Vision of Disorder, but we all have full-time jobs, so we're like, oh, there's no way we can do that. And so then we just had to pivot and think differently. It was like, if we don't know where this is going to take us, but we know where it can't take us if we don't give it the time and resources and energy and space that it needs to reveal itself. And so we'd kind of figured out that at the time there was the normal cycle was often that bands would put out albums every 2 years and then they would tour lots. And that makes sense if you have got tour support and are able to tour. Yeah. Or I think what was happening more and more at that stage was that bands were touring a lot and maybe putting out an album every 4 or 5 years. But as a small indie, you don't really get a shot to do back-to-back tours for 6 or 9 months at a time. So we were like, you know what? We'll tour and we'll play, and because that's great. But what's the point of disappearing and writing a record for a year, letting momentum sort of fizzle out? And so in the initial phase of the band, we released an album a year, one in 98, one in 99, one in 2000, and we toured consistently, did 2 or 3 different tours throughout each cycle, so to speak, and each album built, so we got to do more and more international touring every time we released a new record. And on the third record, we did 3 pretty significant international tours. So we toured with Pitch Shifter, we also toured with Soulfly, and then we also toured with Fear Factory. So it worked, but also, we probably did 10 years creative work in 3 years, if you think about the idea of folks doing an album every 2.5, 3 years. And so at that point, we were also living in a house together, so it's like your social life, your professional life, and your hobby smushed together with the same 6 faces. And so it just feels like it was great and necessary, but if you do that, you unwittingly light a fuse, and there's a finite amount of time that it works for, unless you're exceptionally mature and emotionally intelligent. And we weren't that when we were in our mid-20s.
when you guys returned and released 4, was it just the passage of time and playing in other bands that led to the shift in sound, or was it just kind of knowing you wanted to do different things and, you know, recording technology had changed as well by that point, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was a combination of a few factors. So 4 had a different lineup. A lot of the guys in the band were interested in more, it sounds like a bit of a contradiction in terms to say traditional alternative rock, but you probably know what I mean when I say that at this point. You know, it's like, so yeah, it'd be, and also I think at that point, maybe we were quite comfortable in our lives. There wasn't very much angst. And so I think from memory, I was listening to stuff like Free and Mumford and Sons.
Okay.
And so I wanted to write really hooky, memorable songs, generally speaking, but have them fit into what I felt at the time was a kind of Earthtone-esque thing. So it was Earthtone as a entity representing where the people who were in it were at in 2013. You know, with hindsight, I feel like there's probably about a third of that material. It's strong material, but I don't know if it should have the Earthtone badge on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I mean, you never know that when you're in it. When you're doing something creative, you're you know, following the creative spirit, and it's almost like you're building the plane while you're flying the plane.
Yeah.
It's only when you get some distance from it you get to think about those things. And then, yeah, I mean, technology moved on. New figures in music production emerged, and a chap called Ramesh Dogan-Goda had been doing lots of really high quality work. So that sort of thick, pristine sound that's not quite metal, but not quite really run-of-the-mill rock. But there's just a clarity and a depth to it and a richness, which is great. But I think that also added to the sort of smoothness of that record.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have I covered all of the bits that you wanted to cover?
Yeah.
I was just rambling away, staring out of my window at the rain, and I was like, wait, what was the question?
Well, that record came out in 2013. You're releasing the follow-up now in 2024. Was it just the space of time and just like, you know, you're older, you have jobs, people get married, have kids, whatever, that like you can't do it at the same pace, or were there things that prevented you from writing and recording in that stretch?
All of the above. So I got a really cool job at the beginning of 2014. So I lived in Detroit, Michigan for 5 years.
Oh, wow.
And it was running a music school, so it was great. It's most of my professional career outside of music recording and performance has been in music education. Okay. And so it was great, but it was also intense and very demanding. So I didn't have the bandwidth to do lots of creative work, and every now and again we would talk about it, and we'd exchange demos and try. And I think the guys that were in the UK sort of were kicking things around instrumentally regularly. But yeah, it never gathered pace. And so I wrapped up that contract at the end of 2019, and then kind of like COVID happened. Yeah. And a bunch of big life things happened for me, where there was just a lot of isolation, a lot of grief, a lot of the tough stuff that life throws at you that gives you something to say in an angry way again.
Yeah.
And so yeah, a lot of these songs sort of came from that period, but through the process of trial and error, Owen had also built up like a bank of lots of demos and ideas. But one of the limiting factors had actually been trying to get personnel together in a rehearsal room, and then having to kind of negotiate to get buy-in to work on the material. So again, because home technology has improved in terms of recording, and there's stuff like Easy Drummer.
Yeah.
Things have just shifted. So Owen was much better placed to be able to sort of fully realize his vision instead of trying to explain it and negotiate it, and then just share it and be like, this is what I feel in my heart. This is where I want to go. Who's in?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And there were periods of time where we didn't know if it was going to be Earthtone, if it was going to be something else. But when Joe came back into the fold, you know, he, Owen, and I are really, we've been the principal songwriting contributors. Obviously, anyone else who's been in the band has like played their parts and put in their opinions on song form and arrangements, but fundamentally, you know, Owen's writing the building blocks of lots of things, and Joe and I are collaborating variously on top lines, vocal lines, and then Joe also historically has written the sort of dissonant guitar parts, the sort of anti-leads, if you want to call them that. And so, yeah, this, I think all of the material on this record, a couple of the songs are maybe from late 2019, but most of them are from 2021, 2022, some in 2023.
Yeah.
So yeah, the like 11 years seems massive, but actually there's this half-decade chunk where not a lot happened at all, apart from the odd show when I came back to the UK.
Album's called In Resonance Nexus. Where'd that title and concept come from?
So it was, we were trying to think, you know, what's the essence of Earthtone9 in 2024? What does it matter, and what would we call it? How would we label it? And it really felt like there'd been so many wrong turns, dead ends, disagreements with personnel about what direction to go in. It was like, it really felt like Joe and Owen and I were like on the same page. There was like a resonance there, and I was just, it might have even been Owen actually when we were talking about a nexus. It's like the center of things, and then what does it mean if you think about music as a Venn diagram, where what's the center of the center? Is that the purity of the vision of what you're trying to express? And so it's really partially wordplay. It feels like there's some redundancy in there. When we were originally thinking about it, it was like In Resonance Nexus, but we were. Back in the day, we used to write these really verbose song titles, and some of them were fun, some of them were jokes, some of them were obscure ideas to try and see who would be willing to do research and figure some stuff out and then ask us questions about it. So it felt like the title In Resonance Nexus sounds like something that we would have done in the sort of 1999 or 2000 period, but without going too far down that rabbit hole and it feeling like we're just trading on past glories.
Yeah. Who did the album artwork and came up with that concept?
It was a guy called Colin Marks, who Darren, who was our A&R at the label, sort of connected us to. He was like, you know, I found this guy, he's done some really killer artwork. I think that it could, I feel like his aesthetic is something that you'd be interested in, and he's been very good at interpreting briefs with other artists that I've worked with. So we had a chat with him. He shared some of his portfolio, and we were just blown away by it. And yeah, I sent him some lyrics. I sent him some of the sort of overarching ideas, and he came up with that the front cover, which is the sort of raven-hearted sort of solo statue.
Yeah.
And the back cover of the vinyl is like three figures So it's almost like authenticity and expression are the cauldron that is forging a third figure, which is the nexus of that. And yeah, I mean, it's just I love the album artwork. I'm so stoked about it.
Yeah, it's cool.
It's sort of like a many levels above what we've been able to achieve before. So it feels really great.
Yeah. Because I assume Candlelight's not giving you, $250,000 or whatever to go record the record, and you don't have this pressure to recoup a bunch of money for the label. Are you guys looking at touring and going out on the road, or is it just kind of you're happy to put this record out and just kind of get it into people's ears and hands and just see what happens?
There's somewhat of a see what happens, just because we're aware that we've been away for over a decade.
Yeah.
And before that we were doing things patchily. But, the intent is for us to be a much more functional, to be a band again rather than just a project.
Yeah.
We love playing live. We love winning over audiences that aren't our own. We love playing to our own audience. And so, yeah, it's working with Candlelight is like that family thing where we've known some of the folks there for a long time. So it feels like there are parallels with Copro. And we've been under the radar for a really long time, so it's an opportunity for us to raise awareness that we still exist and that we're still relevant, and then to see what happens, and to also make sure that we're available enough and holding enough space that we can do whatever comes in for us. I mean, if it were me, I want to play in the US. We never got an opportunity to do that. It'd be nice to do some East and West Coast shows, and then some key cities in the middle of things. It would be killer to get to Australia and New Zealand. Just all of the things that we haven't had an opportunity to do. Yeah. That's the stuff that I want to do. We've got a bucket list of killer stuff that we want to work through. For us, because we worked on it for so long with no agenda, not knowing, just for the reason of pure expression, and the songs got really grilled and rewritten a bunch of times. It feels like the material it's our strongest album and our most consistent album by what feels like quite a long way. And we've always had our moments, but because of the intensity of the pace that we had, it felt like we had to take a done is better than perfect approach. And sometimes when you listen back, it's like, that song, it got to where it was going to get to on the timeline that we had, but it could have benefited from another month or another 6 months.